Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. In this video, I thought I would examine the nature of reality itself. Now that's a tall order, I know, but because I've spoken at length about objective reality versus subjective reality, I thought it was important to cover what objective reality actually is, if it's at all definable. Now, according to the classical Newtonian worldview, laws and observations, both biological and physical, which describe interactions between objects might be classed as being objectively true. But this implies a contiguous state of existing regardless of whether an observer is observing something or not. And it also carries an inherent implication that living organisms are nothing more than mere objects that have forces enacted on them, and that of course depends on one's point of view. But this classical idea was shattered with the arrival of Einstein's theories of relativity, because at the subatomic level, particles display behaviours not consistent with the Newtonian view. In the now famous double-slit experiment, for example, photons were shown to sometimes behave like waves and sometimes like particles, depending on whether or not the particle itself was measured. And this, of course, opened the door to further experiments by people like John Bell that blew apart the former dogmatic accepted view of physics, right? And it isn't just photons. It was not just photons. Electrons also displayed the same behaviors because they're also part of the electromagnetic spectrum. As Heisenberg and Schrödinger had theorized, electrons only snapped into positions from their superpositions when measured. Until the particles are measured, their existence in a particular place at a particular time is merely probable. The observation, i.e. the measurement, is what makes the difference. In recent experiments that have been carried out, the same electron was shown to be able to be in two places at once. Even more interestingly, the phenomenon of quantum entanglement was discovered. Now, you could have two completely unconnected, separate particles that would respond to changes simultaneously when only one had its behavior changed. But it gets weirder, because the entanglement phenomenon is even seen in biological life forms. In one experiment, living sulfur bacteria, when interacting with quantized light, became entangled. In another experiment, one plate of bacteria was injected with hydrogen peroxide, producing photon emission changes in another plate that was 5 meters away. These spooky quantum phenomena have also been observed in plants and animals, and it's appearing increasingly likely that the rules of the subatomic world allow the larger world to actually exist. Even stranger than this, though, is an experiment that was conducted by A.G. Manning, R.I. Kachimov, R.G. Dahl and A.G. Truscott at the Australian National University in Canberra, which showed that a particle's choice for the way that in which it behaves depends upon how it's measured at the end of its journey. I.e., the future is determining the present and the past, at least on a quantum level. Now, since all matter is made up of these particles, and since they don't appear to snap into existence until they're observed, it begs the question, who is doing the observing? Is it us, or is it future us? Is it possible that we exist because the future demands it? Did we bring ourselves into existence by the mere act of existing? And that would of course apply to all living things. All life, of course, is interconnected. But the puzzle gets stranger because the universe at large may in fact be a holographic simulation. That's according to the work of Gerard 't Hooft, Leonard Susskind, Professor Leonard Susskind, and David Bohm, among others. And modern philosophers such as Nick Bostrom have also hypothesized that this in fact may be the case. You see, the lie that you were told in school is that the world is made of these solid things called atoms, and that these atoms are made up of course, the central nucleus and electrons that revolve around the nucleus. But if you break an atom down, you get neutrons, protons, and electrons. And you can break the protons and neutrons down and you'll get hadrons. And if you break down the hadrons, you'll get quarks. But none of these subatomic particles are in any way, shape, or form actually solid, despite the models that you were shown in school, right? See, the danger in teaching kids with those sorts of models, and I think it's been done on purpose, to be honest with you, is that the model itself becomes accepted as being representative of true reality, which it isn't. Okay? At a subatomic level, all of these tiny particulate bits of matter are just possible things that might be, or probable things that might be. And they exist when the environment demands that they do. So the whole universe is made of this stuff. You, me, everything that's around us, right? It's all probabilities, possibilities, mathematical relationships between things that aren't yet real, but they could be. And that's objective reality. It's abstract. It's partly chaotic until it snaps into order, and totally incomprehensible to the human mind. So what do we humans do? We interpret reality. We subjectivize, if you like, our small individual slices of reality and map it. We map the external world through our experiences and our sensory perceptions to an internal construct. And that internal construct is imperfect and it's totally full of errors by its very nature. But it's useful. It's useful for navigating and interacting with the greater objective reality, right? So we can only therefore perceive true reality through secondary sources. And these secondary sources are our ability to think, logic, mathematics, experimentation, art, music, you name it. Most of the things that we do are a means and a way to understand not only our existence but reality at large. They are our primitive tools. But even our senses paint a distorted, low-resolution representation of reality. And I've given the example of the visual cortex. You think that you're seeing with your eyes, but you're not. Your eyes are just like a camera. They're just taking in certain light information, which is transmitted through the back of your retina to your visual cortex, where it is interpreted. Okay? Our brains are interpreting that which is around us and then representing a picture, right? They're creating a picture for us to be able to understand where we are. It's very interesting stuff. But at the end of the day, all human experience is a crude representation. It's a little bit like three blind men and the elephant that is in the room, and one of them's got the trunk, one of them's got the tail, and they all think it's different things. That's really what it's like. And yet, despite this inability to understand objective truth and objective reality, like all life forms, we play a critical role because collectively, we are the creators of this universe potentially. Now, I haven't even covered the multiverse thus far. And I don't think I will in this video because otherwise it would get too complex. But getting back to the question of objective reality versus subjective reality, we could say for human beings, the objective reality might be the accepted and shared interpretation of the human experience, right? And it serves us well because we've built cars and computers and boats and ships and rockets and planes. We've also created bombs and guns and other weapons which are quite destructive as well. But using the secondary senses and sources we have, our ability to think, our ability to rationalize and reason, the development of morals, the development of philosophy, we can judge how best to use something or not, whether it is in our best interest to do that. Okay? Now, what has happened is, and part of the reason why we've created so many destructive things on this planet, I think, is because many people adopted a completely subjective reality. Okay? And subjective reality, in my experience at least, produces solipsism, loneliness, isolation, mental illness, physical illness, emotional distress, and hatred. And we've seen this crop up time and time again through human history, right? The one time that we become destructive is when we give in to this solipsistic, narcissistic path of existing. And this latter path is encouraged by certain groups and persons who wish to cause great suffering and destruction to the human race, because they themselves are in pain due to a lack of wisdom. See, they don't understand the things that we've just spoken about. And it makes it very, very hard for them to understand their own existence and their own suffering and what has been responsible for that. You see? So it's these distortions in our perception that are actually at the root cause of why humans do those kinds of things that are unhelpful to us as a species. And further to that, they're unhelpful to other species as well. The development of empathy was not an accident. It was necessary from an evolutionary standpoint. Okay? And it exists to better us in many regards. But if we don't let it, if we block our empathy, if we become completely narcissistic, solipsistic, and totally centered on the self, right? We're not talking about individualism here, right? We're talking about being completely self-centered. When you have that sort of perspective on life, then you're absolutely not going to think about the benefit to others. If you happen to be a nihilist, because here's how nihilists think, and this is why I've classed them as actually being hyper-sane in some regards. They don't grasp things from that perspective. They're still stuck in the classical worldview, okay, that everything is solid and therefore they are unconnected to all other things, to all other events that happen, to all other human beings, to all other living organisms. And so they naturally have this drive to destroy. And as has been often observed, it is easier to destroy than to create, right? So all these things figure into our understanding. And if our understanding starts off on the wrong foot, which for some people it does, then you can hardly expect the outcomes to be positive for the planet, right? Positive for human beings. They're simply not. And I think this is one of the reasons, and these are just my own personal musings to some degree, despite the fact that I will be including sources for the more scientific material, but in terms of the way I see it, it appears to me that there is a deep chasm in those people that wish to destroy. There is something inherently missing in them, right? And I don't mean this just in the sense of the emotional or psychological as such. It could well be physiological. I mean, we know that psychopathy does develop when parts of the brain that induce or produce empathy are missing, right? Or there has been some sort of damage to parts of the brain, whether at birth or through life, right? So this is part of the reason why I think that many, many people are today rather psychopathic, because they've abandoned the they've abandoned the necessary moral characteristics that make human beings capable of interacting in the best ways possible with the world around them. Right? They've become isolationists. And if you take a look at some of the groups that actually do some of the terrible things that we've seen through history, and even in the present day, many of them are exclusionary. Okay, many of them have an isolated sense of self. You see? And when people talk about even those things that are troubling society and have troubled society for a long time, like xenophobia or racism or whatever else, I think many of these things stem from the same place. It's the wrong-headed view of the world. It's the wrong-headed view of self as well, as though you're a disconnected, disembodied being. You're not. Every cell in your body responds in particular ways to your environment. And that means that you have a direct relationship with your environment. Right? So, realizing the symbiosis we have with the universe at large, that's the key and important point. See, what the solipsists have done is that even when they come across new information, such as the fact that the universe may in fact be a hologram, they've somehow managed to create in their own minds, in their own solipsistic minds, the idea that they are separate from it. You're not separate from it. Okay, your actual consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness, by the way, still hasn't been solved, but your actual consciousness has a direct relationship with your physical state, for example, your psychological state, your emotional state, right? And there are many layers to consciousness. It is not quite so simple as you're conscious and that's it. As Freud and Jung noted, there are layers upon layers of what you consider to be yourself. There are many masks that we wear. There are many different types of personas and interactions that we have in the world, many roles that we're told to take on. And we become different people in those roles. And oftentimes many of us respond with a differential attitude to authority, as well as Zimbardo's prison experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, showed. You know? And those things all figure into it all. And this is part of the reason why people who are exceptionally manipulative, people who are self-centered entirely, who don't have a true individual sense of self, by the way, you'll always find that, strangely enough, and this is sort of almost paradoxical, I don't quite know why this is the case, but people who are solipsists are always more ready to become collectivized, despite their solipsism. And I think part of the reason for that is because they feel such a sense of isolation, and because they know that there is something lacking, they find greater meaning in some sense in group surroundings. And perhaps this is why the greatest atrocities in human history have been committed by people that were collectivist in nature. That is possible. But the most dangerous ideologies even that exist tend to be that way. They're totally subjective. They are 100% completely reliant upon a subjective worldview. If objective facts come along, right, they'll ignore them. They'll refuse to accept them. And perhaps part of that is due to evolution in some regards, because, as I said, objective reality, because we can't perceive it directly in any way, shape, or form, we merely perceive a projection of it in our brains, right? Our brains could well be holonomic processors. And because all we are seeing is a projection of true reality, therefore it's incredibly easy for us to dismiss those things that counter our own internal realities. You see, so evolution has given us a double-edged sword in this regard. On the one hand, we've got the capacity for reasoning and logic and for art and music and creativity and beautiful things like this. And on the other hand, we're also handicapped by the fact that we cannot directly perceive reality. Because if we could just see things as they are, my goodness, how easily and quickly would that completely remove all conflict? Humans would just agree from the get-go, wouldn't they? But at the same time, that's not possible because those aren't the rules that the universe operates under. All things which exist, all of them are incapable of perceiving the universe or perceiving objective truth. There isn't a single living creature, I don't believe, that can. And we're only capable of perceiving it through abstract ideas, through abstract representations. It's a little bit like when people talk about radio waves or TV signals and what have you, right? The wireless devices that we use, our phones and whatnot. When we're learning about these things in engineering or in physics, we create these diagrams due to the energy or the output that these things produce. And we call them waveforms. And we designate things as a wave, right? But in actual point of fact, the thing itself is not a wave. That's not what it looks like, quote unquote. It doesn't look like anything. We can see that kind of representation on an oscilloscope, but that's not what the thing itself actually is. Electromagnetic waves, for example, as we discussed, in most cases, what you've got are probability waves being generated, i.e. the thing could be there or it might not be, depending on whether or not there's somebody there to receive it. Or whether there's something there, some form of equipment there to receive it, right? It's very bizarre, but that's the way that the actual subatomic world works, and it's more than likely that that has some sort of interrelationship with the world at large on a much larger, much grander scale. But we represent things with graphics, with mathematics, with other things. It's pretty interesting stuff. We can only see things through representations. But we're supposed to use those. That's the other thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to. Evolution has demanded that we do for some reason. What that reason is, we may not know in our lifetimes, mind you. But if it holds true, if what holds true at the subatomic level holds true on a grander scale, in that the future is actually determining the present and the past, then whatever results from the billions and trillions and gigaplexes of calculations, and the universe actually is a giant calculating machine. This is another interesting thing. I didn't get into that in this video, but it's a giant calculating machine. This is part of the reasons why in the past people have seen it as a remarkable clockwork, if you like, which must have had a clock maker. This is part of the reason why deism exists, the belief in a god, because of the complexity and the grandness of the universe and the way in which things interact, the way things work. That's a whole different kind of discussion, really, but I can understand why people might have those thoughts and beliefs and ideas. Right? But the point is that there are so many people that are unwilling to even entertain those ideas, right? They're happy with their dogmatic, small-minded worldview. They're happy with that. They're happy living in an entirely subjective reality. And that's a sad thing. And the majority of the time, that subjective reality has been fed to them by persons or groups which know more than they do. And because oftentimes, as is the case with human nature, the powerful always want to retain their power, and knowledge is a form of power in many ways, then you do find that sort of thing where the powerful will many times, and again you see this through human history, whether it's the Catholic Church in the Vatican vaults where they keep a lot of hidden knowledge away, whether it's the government itself. Like, for a great example in the UK is the Magna Carta. Almost no one, if not no one, has been granted access to that document, to see that document. It's very peculiar. But this is the way it is. Anything that is of value, of true knowledge, has always been censored. This is not a new thing that we're seeing with censorship, by the way. It's always been censored because the powerful people in the world don't want knowledge getting out there. And there's two reasons for that. I'll cover this very quickly before I leave this video for you to peruse and watch. There's two reasons why knowledge is, to use one terminology, occulted or hidden from view, which is what the term occult, by the way, means. The two reasons are these. Either the people who have it think and believe that they are the only ones that should have it, right? And that they can thus misuse it, or they think it's a case of casting pearls before swine, whereby you shouldn't know things because you wouldn't understand them anyway. And to some degree, the latter is actually true. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't have access to it, those that do want to know, those that do want to learn. Right? So, this is why people who know things should always try and share that knowledge. Because nobody's going to live forever, right? No one's going to live forever, at least not in this material form anyway, right? Regardless of what your thoughts are about the afterlife and whatnot, or reincarnation. I don't go in for those kind of ideas, but some people do, and I'm not dismissing those, by the way. There's some pretty interesting stuff going on. There's some studies taking place into looking at whether life after death is actually possible. And I'm still kind of on the fence about that in some regards, because, and I was talking to a friend about this a few months ago. You see, even the philosopher that I was talking about, Nick Bostrom, hasn't entirely discounted the possibility that there may well in fact be a way of retaining your... If this universe is in fact a holographic simulation, then perhaps the core data that makes you who you are, what we might term as consciousness, survives in some sense. And even people like Sam Harris, for example, are not opposed to that idea, right? And there may be other ways in which that may also be true. So it's not an insane idea to think that might be the case. It's just that we don't have very good proof for it just now. But keep in mind, in many ways, these studies are still in their infancy. In fact, some of them haven't even begun properly yet. So, but anyway, we're getting detracted, as I so often do in my videos, which I'm incredibly sorry about. I just have one of those magpie minds that goes wherever the conversation goes. But regardless of that, it's necessary to know that life is finite, it's limited, even if we find a way. And they're actually working on this at the moment, by the way, not just through transhumanism and other things, but there are people at the forefront of science looking at whether or not it's possible to increase human lifespans, right, by shutting off the telomeres, which age us. If we could stop the aging process in its tracks, that would be akin to it would be akin to creating a life form similar to the immortal jellyfish. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with those creatures, but they're fascinating. Rumour has it that they actually live for hundreds and hundreds of years. Some of them might even live for thousands. We just don't know. But if human beings... Imagine what would happen if human beings never aged. That would be quite a thing, wouldn't it? But it doesn't discount accidental injury or death, does it? Even if you were to biologically live forever, so to speak, you'd still be subject to things that would happen, right? So it doesn't get rid of the idea of death entirely. Nor would you actually not die, by the way. And the reason behind that is because even if you stop aging in its tracks, your genetic structure would still continue to deteriorate at some level. There would always be some anomaly just due to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Okay, all systems, all biological systems, all physical systems experience entropy. Decay. Right? It's just a natural part of existing. It's not even about living, it's just if you exist, you're going to experience that. But at some stage, all people will die. That's my point, right? As much as I'm kind of rambling here about this, but all people will die. And so this is why it's so necessary to preserve knowledge by passing it on. We've always done this through human history. Those of us that have been wise enough to do it is to pass that knowledge along, whether it's through oral traditions as it used to be before writing came along, and then through writing, of course, and books, the Gutenberg press and so forth. And these days it's all, of course, electronic through these mediums of audio and video. So it's important to try and pass on your knowledge, I think, and not keep knowledge hidden from those people that would like to learn. And I think that's where many people in the upper echelons of science, or even in occult societies in some regards, have succumbed to this notion of hiding things away from the unwashed masses, so to speak. If you do that to too extreme an extent, you become a Puritan, and then you develop the same problems as the solipsists do. You know, so people who have the knowledge should actually know better. That's the thing I find fascinating about that. You know, but that's just an observation on my part, most of this. But the thing I was trying to get across, okay, and I don't know if I've succeeded in doing that, is that life itself is actually quite fascinating and magical in many respects. It really is. But there's also many pitfalls for us as human beings. As part of some of the things that I've spoken about, the limitations we have, are part of the reason why it's so easy to manipulate human beings. Give a human being a good story that they can internalize and subjectivize that appears to mesh with their view of objective truth, even though it's not objectively true, and they will take it on board, right? This is where tools like hypnosis and persuasion and rhetoric and persuasion and all sorts of things come in. That's part of the reason why I am always encouraging people to learn about them, because it's only by understanding those that you'll be able to completely grasp how easy it is for any one of us to be manipulated, to be under hypnosis of some form or another, to be persuaded into believing something. Because you're not as immune to it as you think, and neither am I. Okay? And that's why we have to guard against it using reason and logic as our guide. Anyway, I'll leave it there for this video, but if you watched this, thank you very much for that. I want you all to take very good care of yourselves, and we will speak again soon. Bless you all.